Good morning, class, and welcome to this week's video lecture. Now, last week we had talked about marriage, right? Now we're going to be talking about parenthood. The book seems very traditional, doesn't it? In the sense that, right, just like the nursery rhyme I had posted, at the beginning of the week, right? First comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the baby and the baby carriage, right? So this week we're thinking about parenthood. Now, with with many doctrines such as like religion, right? One could say for example, in the Catholic Church, believes that you get married to then be fruitful and multiply and have children, right? So in some customs, some traditions, some cultures, it is customary that when you get married, right, until you get married, you can then have children. But as we know, we live in a different world where that is not the case. We have children that are born to parents that are not married. We have children that are born from couples that plan never to get married, right? They know that they'll be together and be lifelong partners, but that they do not intend on getting married. We also know that there are individuals such as females, and we'll be talking about this in discussion as well, where they decide to have children on their own through a sperm donor with no intention of getting married, or maybe down the road having, getting married, finding a partner because, they feel that they're in a time of their life where they want to be a parent, and, maybe they have not found the right partner yet, but they feel that they want to have a child. We also have couples where they may say, honeymoon, boom, get it done. Now we're pregnant. There may be other couples that say, you know what, we want to wait a couple years, to have children. Maybe we're still establishing our finances, going to school, whatever it may be, and they want to wait a while. Other couples may say altogether, we got married, but we have no intention of having a family at all because of various reasons. So what's to say who's correct and who is wrong, right? I remember I had just gotten married, walked down the aisle, and was greeting all our guests at the reception. And I do not kid you guys, 50% of all the guests, the first thing they said after they said congratulations, they said, so when are you going to start a family? And I'm looking at them like thinking like, okay, are you going to raise them? Are you going to support them? Are you going to feed them? It's kind of like a private conversation between my husband and I, right? What's to say that you get to choose, when we're going to start a family, right? So the value of children. So in most societies, married couples in general and women specifically experience pressures to have children, right? That's exactly what I was just saying. My brother and his wife has celebrated, or they'll be celebrating their 4th wedding anniversary at the end of this month, actually. And my parents constantly, when are you guys going to have kids? When are you guys going to have kids? And it's gone to the point where they've said, you know what? At this point of our lives, we do not want children. We're focusing on our careers. In the future, if it happens, it happens. But we do not want children. Now, my parents, being of an older age, are saying, well, we'd love to meet our grandkids before we pass on. So, sometimes we have those pressures of like, when are you going to have kids? When are you going to have the kids? Sometimes it's not to the, best intentions of thinking of the couple, but for selfish reasons of like, well, maybe I want the one that my mom will always say is like, I'm going to be too old to be able to carry them by the time you guys, think of having kids. My husband and I waited 1 year before having kids, and we still got the pressures of like, well, when are you going to have kids? I'm still waiting. We're not getting any younger. We're going to be like these really old grandparents, right? So it's, the whole value, the pressures, like why do we have these pressures? Again, why is it anyone's business in terms of when we are having children? Now, one of the topics that I always like to bring into discussion is fertility. Now, as we know, there are many individuals, many couples that face many troubling times in terms of fertility issues. Maybe it's the female that cannot have children, or maybe she can get pregnant, but she cannot carry the baby to full term. Maybe it's the male in terms of having fertility issues, in terms of sperm count, in terms of, being able, to be sexually active. It is very difficult for these couples because when they're being bombarded and being pressured to have children, it's very irritating, and it's very, very sad to know that they're receiving these pressures from family members, from friends around them, to be pressured to have kids. Is it that couple's responsibility for them to come out and say, we cannot have kids, or we're struggling to have kids? I have a friend that it took them almost 4 years to have children. And from the very beginning after marriage, she was very upfront about it because she was so tired on her wedding day of people asking her, when are you going to have kids? When are you going to have kids? That after the first year, she just came out flat out and said, we are having trouble getting pregnant. Please respect our wishes. Please do not pressure us. We have enough pressure on our own. Please leave us alone, pretty much, in essence, right? And it worked. A lot of people, right, backed off and said, okay. But then what became encountering was people putting in their 2 cents of, well, if you guys are having trouble, there used to be this remedy, that we used to do back, in our culture, that was traditions, that this could enhance fertility. Or they got, people asking like, well, what do you think of doing, IVF, for having a surrogate, So in terms of coming out and being honest and saying of like, okay, this is, our situation, then the remarks still continued to occur. So again, it's, one of those double-edged swords of, do you want to be upfront and honest at the very beginning, or do you just not say anything, keep it private matter between you and your spouse? Social consequences of parenthood. Married women should share the provider role. Higher level of psychological distress and anger. Declines in marital satisfaction. When you become a parent, I remember, before marriage thinking, how hard can it be to be a parent, and then be an instructor. Like, it can't be that hard. And then in terms of, my husband, well, he's an adult. We'll figure it out, right? Well, reality sinks in and you have the first child, right? And the first child comes along, and poor little Lucia, every time she dropped a pacifier, I would boil that pacifier, right? And I would do everything and anything, right? By the second child, my poor little Amelie, every time the binky would fall on the ground, I didn't boil it anymore. I'd look at it, give it the 5-second roll, just wipe it off, and I'd stick it back in her mouth, right? So it's very difficult, right? Not only to go into this transition of, now you're a parent, now you're taking care of this child, right? So of course psychological distress and anger is going to come about. Of course marital dissatisfaction is going to come about, right? You're going to bicker probably more, especially in the first year or so, because you're all exhausted. You're sleep deprived. My first child woke up every hour on the hour, all night long. We're like zombies all day long because she did not sleep, right? Not to mention when it comes to psychological distress, right? We have depression that sinks in when you're a mother, right? You have the postpartum depression. I had that with my first child, right? This is a topic that is never really talked about. Now we're starting to see that there's a shift in how we're publicly talking about this, but it was a shaming. I remember at times like crying because I'll be honest with you guys, it's not always like pink flowers and, everything's so happy when you're a first parent or a second parent or, a third parent, with your different children. I used to think of morbid thoughts of how to get Lucia from stop crying, right? And I would sit there and think like, I cannot believe I'm thinking of the different ways of physically hurting my child to get her to sleep, to get her from stop crying and crying and crying constantly so that I could lay down just for 5 minutes. and then going to the doctor and then telling them and learning that's normal. It's called postpartum depression. It is normal. Makes you felt so much better, right? About the psychological distress and the anger and just being so upsetting, right? I have a friend that was like, just altogether felt like just ending her life because she's like, I can't do this. I cannot handle this. This is just so much, right? But there's so much help out there if you're encountering, right? And it's not to say that men do not go through postpartum. That is not true. It's different, yes, because of the hormones and everything, but it is just stressful, right? As well as for the male partner as well, right? The key demographic of predicting childless is maybe a couple cannot have kids, right? Marital status, age. We know that the older that we get, especially as a female, we may or may not be able to have children. There's certain tests that are done to predict, right, in terms of the possibilities of her child being born with a disability. My mother had my oldest brother at the age of 47. She actually declined all those tests and thinking, we have a lot of faith. We don't need these tests in terms of seeing, if there is a likelihood of there being a problem with our child. We're going back into the labor force. We're going to school, All of my girlfriends that all went to college with me, all my roommates actually, they're all in their middle 30s, and many of them are having their first child for the first time. So we're starting to see this shift, right, in terms of, waiting and not having kids right out of high school. In the 1950s, a lot of females went to college for the mere fact of they went to find their husbands. As soon as they found their husband, they dropped out of college and they had their children, and that was it. I don't know many of us that have, go to college on the first day of school thinking like, okay, I'm not really here to get my degree. I'm here to find a husband and then get married and then my life is settled now, right? Again, our thoughts, we're having these different changes in terms of how we see our lives, in terms of how we see our careers, our future, our marriages, our children, right? I put a couple of links in terms of, how it's become ridiculed in terms of not having kids. Is it okay for a couple to say, I don't want kids because I'm selfish, right? We have I have another friend, they're military, and she's like, we have to move those kids every 2 to 4 years. Are we being selfish that every 2 to 4 years we're going to have to uproot them from their schools when they grow up, and knowing that they're going to have to move around from school to school to school? Now, some people would say, that is very nice, and that is very brave of them to say we don't want to have children because this is our lifestyle, and we may disrupt our family life. Others may be like, well, I'm military and we uproot our kids every 2-4 years, and that doesn't mean that we're going to screw them up. Does that mean that they're going to be horrible adults when they grow up, right? So again, different choices, that different opinions that people are going to bring into the conversation, to the table. Concerns about young and unwed parenthood. Many years ago, about 10, 15, 20 years ago, we saw a lot in terms of unwed pregnancies, a lot of teenage pregnancies. We don't hear it so much now in the media as we used to in the past. In the past, we've had shows such as Teen Moms, where, they kind of made it popular, where they kind of romanticized the being a teen mom and glamorized it. The Gloucester 18, you'll see that this is a link that I post to a documentary where it was a group of high school girls that all decided that it would be pretty neat to all get pregnant together and raise their kids together, right? So again, the whole glamorization in terms of, pregnancy, because a lot of times we think, it's so cute when children are born. But I remember when I gave birth to my first child, I did not know of all of my physical things that I would be going through as a female after giving birth of a child. Had someone told me before then of everything that a physical woman's changes and, everything we go through from the second you give birth, maybe we would not glamorize, say for example, teen pregnancy so much, right? That's not things that we see on television shows where we make it seem like it's all so perfectly, like carrying the perfect child, right? Like we see oftentimes, right? So as you go through the PowerPoint, you're going to see that there are many different types of charts that Pearson provides us, in terms of being, having children or having no children. Adoption is another topic that is very, very important to have in terms of parenthood, because many times we know of couples that they have been able to be fruitful and, and have their own biological children, but they want to be parents to those children that need parents, right? And so they bring them into these adopted families. We also see a lot of adoptions for couples that cannot have children, and so then therefore they choose the path of adopting children. Adoption is very, very difficult at times to go through the process, because there's a lot of application, there's a lot of bureaucracy to adoption, a lot of interviews that sometimes it becomes off-putting to couples in terms of adopting, because again, you figure, you're just not going to place a child in someone's hands and say, okay, this is your child now. A lot of couples, they just want their child and they know that they're going to be the best parents and they're going to provide for that child, in any way that they can. But again, because of different organizations, because of different laws, because of different, regulations in place, there is quite the process in terms of adoption. Let's see, the transition to parenthood. Why is transitioning so challenging? Sex differences in the transition to parenthood. What can help the transition of parenthood? Again, this is a topic that is very much open-ended, because we can talk about, nursing, breastfeeding, the importance of, one-on-one skin-on-skin contact for the child when they're first born. It is a transition, it is a transition of being single, being married, being single or married, and then having a child. Because again, you figure, that little bundle of joy cannot do anything, right? At the very beginning, you're shaping them, you're socializing them, you're teaching them all these rules and everything of society, of the world, right? It is up to you to bring that child up to be a good working member of society, right? My children are young right now. They're both under the age of 10. And so we're at the stage of, answering so many different questions, even, shutting them away from so many realities that occur on a daily basis. I'd like to think that we're sheltering them in a way where, to them right now, life is perfect. Everyone in this world is nice, although we do teach stranger danger, right? But to them, they don't have to wake up in the morning and think like, what's going around, what's going on with the election, what's going on with overseas, what's going on in Syria, it's so different as we grow older, as they get older, the transition of them being teenagers. Oh my goodness, you guys, I love my wine right now, but I can only imagine how much more I'm going to love it when they're teenagers, let me tell you, right? But that transition that you go through, right, as they grow older, right now I see the transition of my parents with adult children, and the stories that I hear of sometimes of guilt, of self-doubt, and what did we do wrong as parents? Did we provide them too much? Did we do too much? Did we do too little? It's heavy. It is very heavy, right? It's a very heavy topic in the way where, again, media will glamorize, the idea of being parents. And a lot of times you'll see these movies, these television shows where, it's like, oh, we're parents, oh, yay, and then cut to the credits, right? Just like at the end of any love movie, they're all in love, but then we don't see what happens 2-3 years down the road, 20 years down the road, right? So again, a very, very very interesting topic to talk about. You know, and it makes sense, right? Because many of us in the future may or may not, choose to be a parent. And that again is not a bad or a good thing either, right? Or I should not say that, I'm sorry. I mean, it all comes down to the individual. And what I always like to tell my students is, if you take anything away from this, is maybe thinking about the way we approach parenthood and how we ask people. I have stopped asking couples, so when are you guys going to have kids? Because again, I teach this every single semester, right? And, we do not know everyone's circumstances when it comes to parenting. Okay, you guys, I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week. Bye.